Hello everyone. Are you ready to the last keynote of the day? Yeah, let's go. So with us to the last keynote we have Manuel Sousa from Google that will talk about Red Team in Google. So give him a huge clap. Let's go.
Hello, SINFO. It's really good to be back here in Lisbon and at this amazing university. I hope you're all doing great today. I'm sure that all of you have seen similar headlines like this. Every day, dozens of very diverse adversaries are trying to compromise companies worldwide, going after money, intellectual property, fame, and they can go from very sophisticated nation-state attackers, going after the most complex energy compounds and infrastructure, to the 18-year-old that is trying to get his hands on the next GTA 6 trailer. There's also some very exceptional adversaries that can actually afford 2 years of legitimate work to silently pull the back door of everyone's dreams and almost be able to compromise half of the world's systems. And it's actually almost happened a couple of weeks ago with the compromise of the XC library. And I'm pretty sure that you probably heard about this. And if you haven't, I really, really recommend looking for more details about this, regardless of your technical background. But how does a company actually protect itself against this type of attackers? What are the security teams doing out there to realistically simulate and realistically impersonate these kinds of attackers to eventually drive change in organizations? And that's exactly the perspective that I'd like to bring you today. And with this, I would really like you to welcome to my talk. But before, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Manuel, and until very recently, I had the pleasure of occupying the same seats that you're all today, attentively listening to the amazing talks here at SINFO. I am currently an information security engineer at Google, working in the Google Red Team, or offensive security, and it has been 3 years now. Before that, I used to be a student here at Técnico. I spent a bunch of time playing CTFs with the local team, with SST, that you probably all know about. A couple of years participating in competitive programming, and later doing pen testing for medium-sized companies. And during all my studies, I also had the pleasure of collaborating with really smart individuals at Serviços de Informática, not only here in Alameda, but also in Tagus Park. So, Red Team. What exactly is a Red Team? The actual term actually comes from the US military, and it's very broad and generic, and it's mostly related to like doing physical attacks to bases. But the concept of red teaming actually transcends the military format and fits really well in the digital world, specifically in cybersecurity, and it finds great applications in corporations like Google. For example, we have legal red teams. We have a bunch of lawyers trying to find loopholes in loopholes in existing laws, and find new alternatives that could perhaps put Google in legal trouble. We have abuse red teams where we have engineers actually trying to find abuse perspective in products, like trying to get free subscriptions or something like this. And we have more specialized red teams like the Android red team, where they get to really focus on specific parts of a certain technical aspect. I work in the offensive security red team, which also translates to the standard red team that you're probably more familiar. And we only focused on the digital realm, and we rarely do physical attacks unless they usually require some sort of digital device. And for people less familiar with the security industry, I think it comes a bit as obvious that the goal of a security red team is to find vulnerabilities. However, I think this is very often not the case, especially in the case of Google. So the primary objective of the Google Red Team, it's actually to impersonate and simulate malicious attackers and accurately launch attacks on Google following their modus operandi. Our primary goal is to identify gaps in our detection pipelines and try to verify that the current ones are still in place and being effective, but also to build new ones and finding the gaps that could improve the security aspect of the company. I will talk later in this presentation about the different type of attackers that are out there and that we also try to simulate at Google. So the biggest difference between a red team from other security engagements is the amount of information that an attacker has. For example, a nation-state attacker doesn't really have access to a lot of internal information, doesn't really have access to the internal documents or the source code. On the other hand, if we are simulating a malicious insider or a malicious employer, then yes, it makes sense because they are already on the network. They have access to the source code. They have access to the documents. And we need to pay attention to these differences of attackers. So inherently to the way that we are restricting ourselves to realistically impersonate these attackers, we are basically blindfolding ourselves. So it becomes extremely inefficient to find vulnerabilities when compared to other processes like pen testing, where most of the times we have all of the information and our goal is to find as many bugs as possible in the shortest period of time. And one thing I also like to mention is red teams usually last very long, from 6 weeks to several months, exactly because we are goal-oriented. So even if you find vulnerabilities going after a certain attack chain, if you're not getting closer to our goal, it doesn't really matter because we still are goal-oriented and our main goal is really to find our final objective. So about the Google Red Team, we are a sizable team that is spread across the US, but also in Europe. And as I said, our main goal is to improve the detection capabilities of Google. And because if we have a detection team that it's not really seeing any types of attacks, it doesn't really mean that they are not there. So it becomes really important to test that the safeguards are still in place, bringing new ones, and it's also, these red team exercises are also a great capability to show to the company because they often come wrapped in this narrative, in this story, and that gets people really hooked and raises a lot of awareness. For executives, it's also very different to hear in the news that some random company was compromised and getting a report showing them that this could actually happen to them as well, to their companies. And if I would have to frame the red team from our blue friends, from the detection teams, they would say that the red team is usually the only adversary that will sit down with us and tell us how they hacked into the company, into the systems. We have a couple of resources out there on the internet, including a nice docu-series that we filmed last year called Hacking Google, which I really recommend you checking after this presentation. As I said previously, there's a significant difference between red team exercises and other engagements, but what does our scope look like? There's a lot of sophisticated adversaries out there that use 0 days, which are unpatched, unknown vulnerabilities. There's at the same time, there's also a lot of unsophisticated ones that are targeting people, conducting spear phishing campaign against people. And I'm sure you all know examples here in Portugal, especially from a couple of years ago. So we are basically not limiting ourselves to the systems, but we're also targeting the process and the people. Processes such as the password reset process or the way that we are onboarding employees in the company. We try to target those processes as well. Another point to be made is that red teams are not comprehensible, not at all, because they usually, due to the large scope that we have, they only show the easiest path that an attacker could take to reach their goals. And we typically also have no limitations of the things that we target. But we do have to follow certain rules consciously that we call the rules of engagement. So despite pursuing realistic adversarial simulations, we can't really abide by the same rules as real attackers. For example, we don't access customer data, we don't take systems down, we don't do actions that could put us in some sort of legal or compliance trouble. So we always consult with the appropriate teams when things are not 100% in the clear. No bribing, no coercion. These rules usually say the things that we must not do. And yeah, obviously we don't chloroform security guards. So let's go through a concrete example of how usually we start a red team exercise. And in this example, this is purely a fictional example and it's not part of an actual exercise. So first of all, we define who's our attacker? Who are we trying to impersonate? Who are we trying to simulate? In this case, we are simulating, we want to simulate a malicious insider or a malicious employer who is attempting to steal data about personalities and use it to blackmail them. So who is our attacker here? A malicious insider is usually someone that has a lot of familiarity with the systems, especially if they are in engineering. I mean, they designed the systems, they created the systems. They're usually working alone with their own personal motivations and kind of a strong desire to remain undetected because the consequences are quite high. They could actually go to jail because of this if they get caught. And we also define the goals of the exercise or the goals of the attacker, which in the case are very straightforward. It's getting access to as much data as possible and then exfiltrate that data outside of Google. This is our exercise life cycle. This is, yeah, it's huge. I'll try to be brief. So after we have the attacker defined and the goals, we start a formal planning doc, and then we call our partners from the threat intel. These are the folks that know what's happening in the world. They know what attackers are doing. And the reason why we want them to comment is because they have the knowledge of what the bad guys are doing out there. So they will be able to provide actionable feedback and actually tell us whether we're trying to do is accurate or realistic or not. Then we move to execution, and this is usually where the exercise starts, the action starts. But before, we still tell our stakeholders that we are about to do this. So like we give a heads up to the detection and response teams that we are doing this. And we share with them this thing that we call the activity log, which I'll try to focus a bit on this now, because it's a huge and very important artifact. This is where we log all the bad things that we do, all the accesses, all the people that we compromised, kind of like a timeline of the things that we did. And the goal of this document is not only to create this timeline, but to give an opportunity to detection and response. If they detect something, they will be able to trace back to us. Because obviously we don't want them to bother too much with their time, because we are not real adversaries and they have more important things to do. And yeah, also the activity log is very useful at the end of the exercise because it will allow other teams to backtrack over what we did and check what signals were actually useful and which ones we should improve or even implement. Yeah, then at the end of the exercise, I will focus a bit more on the execution later, but at the end of the exercise, we basically grab our findings, we make sure to observe what kind of signals worked well, what signals didn't work so well, and basically improve the detection, finding new signals, develop new signals with the detection teams. We write a report where we put all of our findings and we put all of our narrative of the attacker in this exercise. And we make a presentation to the entire security community inside Google. And then we have one last step, which is really important, which is hand over our findings to a remediation team, because if the things that the red team finds don't get fixed, we have very limited impact. So it's very important to have someone that will advocate for our findings. And yeah, mentioning the partnerships. The main driver to a successful red team, it's a very close collaboration with the blue team, or the detection and response team. And I think there tends to be kind of a red versus blue kind of mentality in the industry. But I think success usually only comes from seeing each other as partners. If the red teams hide their capabilities so that they can reuse them in other exercises, then the blue team will not get a chance to develop capabilities around them. On the other hand, if blue teams don't give a chance to red teams to continue when they are detected, they will miss out on useful data. They'll miss out on useful data because we'll be able to continue our exercises as if the detection didn't happen, and that's very valuable. A second team I would like to highlight is the threat analysis group. These are the folks, as I said, they know what the bad guys are doing out there. We get a lot of inspiration from them, and we rely a lot on their intelligence to know what attackers are doing so that we can make more realistic exercises. And similar to the Google Red team, I would also recommend you checking the episodes on the Hacky Google series about these two other teams. So finally, where the action starts, the execution lifecycle. This is basically what happens during an exercise. So we do the planning, which is not very exciting, but it's really necessary, and it sets the exercise for success. But the first stage that we do is the reconnaissance. This is the stage where we try to find as much information as we can about our target. Either that be what kind of systems they use, what kind of cloud providers do they use, people working on projects, where are those people located, their time zones, what times do they usually work, if they're active on social media, everything that can be useful to establish the second stage, which is the foothold. This is when we actually get access, we get initial access to the first victim or the first system that will later allow us to execute steps closer to our goal. Think of this as in getting the first step through the door. And it requires quite some effort to establish a foothold. We often sometimes also have a bit of shortcuts. So for example, instead of trying to compromise a victim from the beginning, we have someone within the company that offers to be our victim. We call them the willing victim. They are willing to be our victims. We send them an email or whatever that is, and then they will follow that email and get compromised, and that's when we start our exercise. Then we have the post-exploitation. This is usually where we try to establish persistence, like making sure that our malware gets persistent and we don't lose access. Also, if we start in a less privileged user, this is also where we try to go for more privileged users. And during this time, we try to harvest data and get as much data as we need that will help us in the next phase. Then lateral movement. This is basically using our foothold. This is where we try to go for more interesting stuff. Either that is establishing more footholds, compromising systems, things that get closer to our goal. This is what we do in post-exploitation. In lateral movement. And what I would like to highlight here is that this is not as simple as it looks like in this diagram. So very often we have to go back, do more reconnaissance, try to get a new foothold, because even if we find vulnerabilities and we manage to compromise some systems in the way, it doesn't actually mean that we are getting closer to our goal, and we always have to have that in mind. So sometimes we need to go back, do reconnaissance, repeat this process, and sometimes it even forks. We have people in the exercise teams that are doing this cycle in parallel. And then the supporting pillars of a red team. I would like to give you 2 examples. As I mentioned, the final step of an exercise is to hand over all of our findings to a remediation team. And basically, this team is responsible to advocate and represent our findings to the affected teams. They are responsible to scope, but also work to making sure that the issues are getting fixed. Because most of the times, vulnerabilities are quite straightforward to fix. Like we report them, they understand the bug, and they can easily fix it quite in a short time span of time. But the harder things to fix are making sure that attacks get harder, basically doing security improvements. And with security improvements, they're kind of competing with the software features. So the remediation team is also responsible to advocate for these security improvements and try to prioritize this in the calendars of the product teams. And the other team is the research and development team. This is usually where members from the red team can spend a bit of time between red team exercises, doing all sorts of things. almost everything that supports a red team operation is done by the research and development team. Whether that is building a new implant, building new malware, our payload delivery tools, new techniques, and even infrastructure. So for example, even other skills outside cybersecurity are really useful here, like DevOps. All good attackers need to have great infrastructure, or having knowledge of operating systems internals, because a lot of the times, exploits are not even related to a bug itself, but to the actual intricacies of a system. And we also provide the playground to the people that like to do research. And very often, a lot of good things come out of this research. For example, finding new ways to backdoor Chrome. And sometimes even some of these research projects actually spin new exercises and spin new techniques. So yeah, as kind of bit of as a conclusion, we have different roles in the team. So we want to be the adversaries of a red team exercise, so accurately simulate and impersonate these malicious attackers. We are also a sparring partner, so testing the detection capabilities of the company, that's our main goal. But obviously, we also find vulnerabilities, and we also want to get them fixed. We are a storyteller, and I think this is what distinguishes us from the rest of security teams. Because one thing is to tell a story whether you have a bug and how impactful that bug is. Another is an attacker could have done this, and it did it through this way. Those are two different things. We are also a data provider. This means that because we run so many red team exercises in a year, we have a unique perspective of understanding whether certain protections inside Google are actually effective or not. So this is where we make conclusions whether we should improve those protections and how. And yeah, as a small conclusion, our attacks are not actually real, right? And for various reasons. They differ from real attackers because, in many ways it's something that needs to be very clear. I'd like to mention the principles of scale. So for example, some nation-state attackers, they have access to 0 days. And the economies of scale between a nation-state attacker, like a government, and a red team are very, very different. But if we want to simulate a nation-state, then we also need to use 0 days, right? The thing is, a nation-state attacker, if they have a 0 day, they can weaponize it against hundreds of targets, and this works very well for them. But for us that work in security, if we have a 0 day and we're sitting down on a 0 day, we don't want to sit down on it for too long, right? Maybe if we're lucky, we can use it in one exercise, but then it needs to be fixed. And 0 days are also very different, very hard to defend. Detection teams, like what are they going to do about it, right? Supply chain attacks. They're also very hard for us to simulate. We can just go out there and compromise a random GitHub repository that is used by thousands of other customers. We can't do that. And we also have a huge bias. So red teams, they usually know what works, and they also know what doesn't work. And like real attackers, they don't know this. They try things and they get caught. So we need to be very conscious about this and still try those things even if we know that they will fail. So I've mentioned the different groups of adversaries. This is how we encapsulate them inside Google. Obviously, there's some variations. So we start with the malicious insiders. These are usually the employees that act maliciously. Like at some point, they will start doing bad things. They have less security background, but on the other hand, they're very familiar with the systems they're targeting. They are already on the network. And yeah, they don't need to be malicious per se. They could also be coerced or blackmailed to do these things. And also, when we compromise an employee and we get an implant in their machines, they kind of also are a malicious insider. Then we have activists, and this usually ranges from the random script kiddie on the internet that knows how to run Metasploit and some random code on GitHub to a very experienced security professional. And the goal of this group is usually to be opportunistic, right? They want to make noise. They want to take down a website and go to Twitter and brag about it. Then we have nation-state attackers. These are the big guys. They can really range from unsophisticated to very sophisticated. Several groups, they have a lot of resources. They have capabilities to develop really powerful bugs, to find 0 days. They have excellent infrastructure, and their stealthiness also depends on where they are located. So for example, if you're talking about a nation state that is sponsored by North Korea, they probably don't care too much whether they're detected. But if you're talking about a big government in the middle of Europe, maybe they have more reasons to be more quiet, because that could turn into a PR nightmare for them. Also, I want to say that, yeah, even if some groups are not that powerful, they still have the capabilities of like buying those bugs in the black market and weaponize them to meet their goals. And then the final group is criminal groups. They're generally money driven. They go after money. And the sophistication is also really similar to the nation state. Could be from very sophisticated to very sophisticated. One thing that I would highlight about this group is that they're less staffed and they usually move more quickly. I think Lapsus, the example of the GTA trailer, actually fits in this group. So I'd like to make a small exercise over the primary question that we ask ourselves in a red team, especially during a red team exercise. Is this something an attacker would do? And here attacker is left a bit abstract on purpose. So let's suppose that we would like to compromise whatever that is, this car. So first of all, we need to make sure we understand who are we trying to compromise. Is that the driver? Is that the person that is being driven? And also, where is the car located? Is the car in a very protected compound, in a luxury apartment garage, or is just out there in the middle of the street? So for example, we also need to think about the attackers. Who are the attackers? So in the case of a nation state that has a lot of resources, they could probably pull off like a remote engine control unit using some of the capabilities of the car, or even compromise a vendor app that is being used on the car and maybe remotely force the car to make something that is not supposed to. On the other hand, we also have attackers that are not so sophisticated. So for example, if you left your laptop in the middle of your car and your car is parked on the street, they can just smash the door and get the laptop. And that's basically being opportunistic. It's what the activists usually try to do. And the message I want to pass here is that sometimes in a red team we also have to do the same. We have access to sometimes data, and we know that if we trigger certain commands, if we know that we'll get access to that data, we are going to get detected. But that's fine, because if that means that we get the data and we manage to get out, that's still good, even if it will end up getting us detected. Yeah, and to make a small conclusion about thinking like an adversary, we cheat sometimes, obviously. Again, we run a lot of exercises during the year, and I cannot wipe the knowledge that I learned on the previous exercise. And obviously, as time passes, I get better understanding of the systems. And obviously, that knowledge will come forward. We'll go through the next exercise as well. It's important to be conscious of who you are impersonating. For example, I think often if you're simulating a very constrained nation state, you can be very tempted to go to the code base or to the resources that we have as Google employers and pick at small part of code that could make a huge difference. But you should keep in mind that a real attacker would not have access to that information, so neither should we, and we should be conscious about it. Evaluate shortcuts, but not too many. As I said, sometimes we rely on shortcuts like getting a willing victim that will get us through the initial foothold. Or sometimes we even start with an implant in a certain system that is closed to the area that we are targeting. But if we do too many of these shortcuts, it will basically turn our exercise into something that would never happen out there, and this is something we do not want to do. We need to understand the limits of the simulation. We are limited. Again, we are not real attackers. We have to comply with law. We have to comply with compliance issues. We have our rules of engagement, and this needs to be very clear. And also, we shouldn't really try to be that smart. We shouldn't try to do what an attacker wouldn't do. We should try, for example, to set up our infrastructure in similar ways that they do. I think being over stealthy with a certain mechanism that can be easily correlated with other factors, it's something that we shouldn't do, and we need to be very careful with that. And now I have 2 more slides about a career as a red teamer. Obviously, having security background is good, but I think all of you here are students and you're also learning a lot of other things. Obviously, it's a good start. I don't think it's really that important. And having a capability to find bugs, whatever those bugs are, it could be security bugs you find in CTFs or bug bounties, to casual bugs that you find in your software engineering courses or things you report on GitHub. I think those things are really valuable as well and clearly tell your thought process into finding bugs. And even if you're not so good at finding security bugs, but you're good at finding other types of bugs, that's still kind of halfway because security bugs are usually not that different. They're just a specific type. Building tools is also a great way of becoming a red teamer. I remember when I joined the CTF team here, a lot of the people out there, they didn't really know security, but they were great toolers. They really knew how to build new tools. And honestly, a lot of red teaming sometimes, the attacks are so simple that even a software engineer can understand them, but the tools that are supporting those attacks, those are way more important. So building great tools is also a great way to get started. And finally, conference talks. If you learn something new and like to share it to the world through a blog post, that's also very valuable. And open source your tools. I think here in this university, there's also a lot of good examples. People that, I don't know, I remember signing up for the courses and someone as just open source, something that would very quickly get me the best shifts for my classes. So things like this, I think, are very valuable. And a bit of my personal path. Bug bounties was actually what got me started in cybersecurity. And when I started, the security landscape was a lot different. Nowadays, I have to say that it's a bit hard to start in this industry. But if going through the unknown is something that you like, then it's definitely something I think you should try. And to be honest, back when I started, I really didn't know what I was doing. Like I had no idea what I was doing. But then at some point, some XSSs would start popping out, and I would start to understand how things worked, and I think that's exactly why it matters. And one of the things that I also like about bug bounties is not only they will exercise your bug finding skills, but you'll be forced to communicate the technical details about your bugs. And that will also force you to understand the impact and the security, the impact and the severity of your bugs. And this is really important. I actually think this is something that it's useful in almost all domains of security, and one of the characteristics that really defines a great security engineer. Obviously, work experience. I think any work experience is really good, and this is something I have been talking with the folks from SINFO as well. I was a research fellow here at the SE, or Serviços de Informática, as I think it's called now. And during most of my time, I did nothing related to cybersecurity. But I actually think that all the systems, all the cloud infrastructure, all the data center network challenges that we had there really paid off in the long term and complemented a lot of the security knowledge that I gained over time. So I think you should not worry too much if you're not doing core security work in the initial years of your university. I think anything that you're learning is going to be a great complement to a cybersecurity career, because again, I think cybersecurity at the end of the day is also about navigating weird problems and develop this sense of getting a deep expertise in something that is completely random. And whether that is managing systems at RNL or the SE or managing attack defense infrastructure in a CTF, I think everything is valuable. And finally, I would like to mention CTFs. This is probably the place where I learned the most, where I had the most fun, where I also invested a lot of time. It's a place that really puts your security knowledge into practice. And the reasons why is because you're almost, every time you go to CTF, you're also kind of forced to be put in contact with the real world, because if there's a new popular bug that came out, and you probably have to exploit it in a CTF. And honestly, I think, yeah, most of my security knowledge that I gain in university really comes out of CTFs and trying to solve those challenges and be very, very resilient. And as a final message, if there's one thing that I would like you to leave from this talk, is about resilience and perseverance. It's actually something that we get a lot from CTFs. Because I think a lot of the challenges that we solve in a red team really require those skills. And honestly, I mean, I think all of you are students here in this university, and you inherently are developing these skills in all of the courses of your academic career. But yeah, I really think it's something that maps really, really well to the red team world. Because every time we find something new and something gets fixed, we are basically making our jobs harder for the next time. We are basically leveling up every time we fix a new bug or every time we end a new exercise. And the next time will be a lot harder. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manuel. It was a good presentation, I think, and now we have time to a Q&A. Want to ask something?
Yeah. I'll be around, so if you just want to discuss something random, just feel free to catch me on the corridors.
I have a question about the exploiting part, not exploiting, but finding vulnerabilities. You said that we shouldn't look at the code base to look for things. We should avoid that. Why is that? Shouldn't we look for bugs in the code base and then try to exploit it?
We shouldn't do that depending on who you are trying to impersonate. So I think the message that I tried to pass was that the red teams are not really the best way to find bugs, though we often do because sometimes we have access to the source code. But that only depends on what type of attackers you are impersonating. If for some reason the attacker would have access to the source code, so you'll also have access to the source code. But if you want to find bugs in a source code at scale, there are other domains of cybersecurity that do that a lot better and a lot faster.
Thank you.
Anyone? Okay, so outside you can also ask Manuel something that you want in the showcase area. Now let's pick the winner of this session. So let's give him a huge round of applause. So and the winner is Rui Pedro CD. Is it here? Nice. Give him a huge round of applause also.